Hello, my name is Christian Clark. This is for Aviation 320 Instrument Flight. Today we're going to be doing a brief lesson on the IFR requirements for your inspections, your airworthiness documents, and required equipment in order to be legal for IFR flight to fly on instrument flight rules. You can follow along. I've got all the references, as you can see here, noted in your FAR aim, so if you'd like to follow along in that, feel free. Without any further ado, we'll kind of roll right into it. We'll start out with what you need. So this is a lot of information. It's a lot to remember in order for purposes of a check ride, as well as just to remember every single time you go fly to be legal. So we like to use memory mnemonics that help you remember these things just easily off the top of your head. So kind of starting out with inspections, I like to use the mnemonic AVIA. Helps me remember everything that you need. So starting out with the A, we've got airworthiness directives. Those are issued by the FAA. A lot of times they start out as your service bulletins that are issued by the manufacturer. Those are recommended at that point when they're service bulletins, but then once they become adopted by the FAA and issued as an airworthiness directive, then they are mandatory. Moving on, we've got your VOR checks. For the V, those need to be performed within every 30 days. There are several different types that we can roll through. I've got those highlighted here. For the different types of your VOR checks, I like to use the mnemonic VOGDA. Stands for your different types. Starting out, you've got VOT, stands for your VOR test facility. Be listed in your chart supplement. That needs to be performed with an error of plus or minus 4 degrees or less. The next two types are your airway and airborne checks. These are performed obviously while flying. Airborne are going to be a visual reference that's going to be listed in your chart supplement, whereas the airway check is going to be performed while along a Victor airway. Both of these need to be within plus or minus 6 degrees of error. The last two are your ground check, which can be performed near a visual reference that will be listed in your chart supplement as well, plus or minus 4 degrees of error. And last but not least, you've got your dual check. This can be performed with any aircraft that has more than one VOR receiver. You can check them against one another, and the error again must be within 4 degrees. Moving on to I for inspections. The inspections that must be performed in order to be airworthy. Everyone needs an annual. But if you're for hire or compensation, then you need a 100-hour inspection as well. The next A is for your altimeter pedostatic system. Must be checked or serviced within every 24 months. The T is for your transponder. Again, every 24 months. And last but not least, you've got your ELT within every 12 months. Must be checked. Moving on, you've got your airworthiness documents. I'm sure you remember this from private. You've got your aero documents. These are going to start out with your airworthiness certificate. This is valid forever unless the aircraft is either altered or crashed or damaged in some way, then you need to get a new one. Your registration certificate, this is valid for 3 years. Again, unless sold or exported out of the country, then you'd need to obtain a new registration. The O is for POH and weight and balance. These are particular to each specific aircraft. So each aircraft needs its own particular POH and weight and balance that must be in the aircraft at all times for legal flight. Moving on to required equipment. There's a few different options here. You can, if you have an aircraft that has an MEL, a minimum equipment list, then you would just simply follow the provisions that are outlined in that MEL or for what you need for legal flight for that aircraft. For all others that don't have an MEL, you need to follow FAR 91.205, which outlines all the required minimum equipment. We'll kind of roll through them here. Obviously, IFR flight is also pertains to any other VFR flight that you would do as well. So for IFR flight, you need everything stated in VFR as well as IFR particular equipment as well, which we'll kind of roll through. These memory mnemonics I like to use for day VFR. I like to use A tomato flames. Rolling through them really quickly, you've got your airspeed indicator, your tachometer, oil pressure and temperature gauges for the two O's. The M, you've got manifold pressure gauge, A is your altimeter. Must be sensitive, which means basically that it has to have a Colesman window or the ability to adjust different pressure settings for a given day. Temperature gauge, they're referring here to your exhaust gas temperature. F is your fuel gauge. L is landing gear position indicator light if necessary. Obviously, if you're flying a plane with fixed gear, you don't need that. You've got your anti-collision light, which would be your strobe beacon, and magnetic compass, again, ELT, and last but not least, seat belts for everyone. So that's what you need required for your VFR day equipment. For night, it's another really easy to remember mnemonic with planes. We've got flaps. So flaps is going to stand for your fuses, landing light if for hire for commercial use, anti-collision strobe light, position lights, these are going to be your port and starboard nav lights, your red and green, and then finally your source of power, and this is going to be from either an alternator or a generator depending on what your aircraft has. Finally, we get to IFR required equipment for any type of IFR flight. The mnemonic we like to use is grab card, and that stands for G, you've got, again, generator or alternator for your source of power. Radio, a few things to note here. You've got, must be a two-way radio, and then the required nav equipment for that flight as well. So whether if it's going to be, say, a VOR cross-country flight, you need a VOR indicator as well. A stands for your attitude indicator. B is ball. That would be your slip and skid indicator to indicate if the aircraft is coordinated and in trim. C is clock with seconds for those timed approaches and things like that. A is going to be altimeter, again sensitive with the Colesman window so that you can tune in and set your given pressure setting for the day. R is your rate of turn. This could either be a turn coordinator or a turn and slip indicator. Either one is valid. And then last but not least is your directional gyro. This is going to be your heading indicator, which will be slave to that magnetic compass. So that, in a nutshell, is what you need to be legal in terms of your inspections, documents, and required equipment for legal IFR flight.